I grew up in a very large extended family of working poor Puerto Rican immigrants, most of whom lived in the Bronx. A few of us were stranded in Brooklyn. And we would get together to celebrate the holidays, Christmas and New Year, celebrate birthdays. We'd go on picnics to the park, and we'd go to the beach together, and we summered together. Okay, so how do working poor immigrants summer? You go upstate to upstate New York, and a couple of the families in this extended family had purchased 2 small plots of land. And everybody in the extended family, and I mean from the smallest of us to the oldest, helped build 2 houses and a series of shacks. And then we could all go up there on weekends, stay a week during the summer, and we loved it. It was amazing. For the kids who grew up in the concrete jungle, we played in the fields and walked through the woods and swam at Round Lake, and it was fabulous. All the women, the moms and the aunts would cook together, and they were always talking and laughing, and they had such a good time. The men would, my dad and the uncles, they would drive us up there. They would continue fixing and making things, and they drank a lot of beer. It was really great. And we were all together all of the time, except for Saturday nights. Because on Saturday nights, the grown-ups went to Las Villas. I never got to go to Las Villas, but it was a magical, mysterious place because our fairly drab parents and aunts and uncles would get all dressed up and go for dinner and dancing, which was just like the movies from the 30s and 40s. So I thought it was so glamorous and sophisticated. So Las Villas were here in upstate New York, not far from where we're filming this. And they were known as the Puerto Rican Alps and the Latin Borscht Belt. So they catered to primarily Puerto Ricans at this time, and by serving the food that we loved, a lot of roast pork, and bringing up bands who played salsa and mambo and cha-cha and all of these. And they would dance and they'd stay out all till like 4 o'clock in the morning. They would come home, I imagined, right? I usually slept through it. The kids, the little kids, like me at that time, we were supposed to be taken care of by our teenage cousins who were babysitting for us. But they didn't babysit for us. As soon as the cars left, the teenage cousins would leave and they would go hang out with their friends in the woods, making out and smoking. The kids, we ran wild until we were exhausted. We went into one of the houses and we all slept in one of the living rooms. We had blankets and pillows and we slept on the floor. That was our bedroom for all the little kids. So I'm fast asleep. And I wake up because I hear, a commotion of some sort. And I'm like, what is that? And I wake up and I hear yelling and sobbing and little snatches of, try this, lie her down on the bed. And then finally, the most exciting one, go get the scissors. I was totally awake by this time, right? And one of the aunts comes rushing out. And she goes to the kitchen and she gets the scissors. She goes running back to the bedroom. She leaves the door ajar. This was the bedroom where all the women would get ready to go do their makeup, get dressed. And I failed to mention that a really important part of getting dressed was the foundation garments that they used. So this was like 50s and early 60s. So you remember those very pointy, feats of engineering bras. Well, they all wore those, but then they all wore girdles. And I had one cousin, Eva, who was a beautiful woman, a little chubby. And she had just gotten divorced, and she got herself the top of the line Playtex girdle. So all the little girls would go into this bedroom. We got to see them, wiggling into these girdles. It was not easy. Hers was way too small. It was made out of rubber. I remember that. Anyway, so the commotion, the scissor, the aunt runs in with the scissor, leaves the door ajar. I tiptoe over because I have got to see what's happening in there. I peek in, and there is my cousin Eva lying down on the bed with the ants lined up on either side of her, and two ants on either side are trying to pull up the bottom of the girdle so her mother, who's wielding the scissor, can get in there and cut the girdle. And she does. And there's more sobbing, and as soon as the girdle is off, all of these women collapse, laughing so hard they can barely stand it. My cousin Ida was not laughing. She was sobbing and upset and humiliated. I still remember the image of her. So Playtex, the girdle that I told you was made out of rubber, it had these little vent holes. Now it was too small. So what had happened to Ida was her flesh had come out of the little vent holes, and then she'd been dancing, and it was summer and it was hot, and she sweated, so it was like a magic seal had formed. So when that thing came off, it was not a pretty sight. I go running off and go to bed, make believe like I'm sleeping, go to the floor, I should say, and make believe like I'm sleeping. The next day, the aunts and my mom, everybody, while they're making breakfast and serving, they're talking, and every once in a while they break out laughing. All the little kids are like, what's going on? And finally, it was such a gem, I shared it with my cousin Jeannie, who was my best friend among the cousins, and then everybody knew. And the men found out, and they were all laughing, and it was just poor Ida that was humiliated. She had the most miserable Sunday of her life, I think, up to that point. I'm sure worse things happened to her. Well, you would think this was something that I wouldn't remember that much, and I didn't really. But years later, when I was no longer a little girl, but turning 12, one of the aunts, my favorite aunt, said, I have special birthday presents for you. And I'm going to bring them to your house and we all get together to celebrate your birthday. I'm so excited because she would get me really good presents. And she arrives and she's got two boxes. There's a small little box and then there's a bigger box, right? She hands, we have the little cake, they sing happy birthday. I go for her boxes immediately to open them, and the little box is a leather diary, fake leather diary with a little key and lock that at that point was, life did not get any better than for you to finally have a private, you can lock a diary. And then I go to the big box. And for the big box, I'm thinking dress, pretty blouse, a sweater maybe. It could have been anything, but I'm thinking definitely clothing. And I was right, it was clothing, because I opened up the box and it had tissue paper. I peeled back the tissue paper and there is a girdle. And my favorite aunt looks at me and says, with a big loving smile on her face, you're a woman now. How long is it?